Welcome to Power Lunch Live. It is Rhett. I'm Rhett Power, your host, and we do this program, as you know, every Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and most Fridays around 12 noon Eastern Standard Time. Thank you for joining us as we are. I'm calling these the quarantine conversations because we are all quarantined. I hope you are too. Hope you're staying safe and healthy. Now, the point of the show is to have today's thought leaders, best-selling authors, people who are doing amazing work in the world, who can help us learn to be better and to get better at what we do. And the fun part about the show, to me, is that it's interactive. And the way that happens is if you ask questions. Now, you can do that just about anywhere. You can do it on LinkedIn. You can do it on Facebook. You can do it on Twitter, YouTube, and I probably missed something, and Facebook, I think. You can do that all on those platforms. We monitor those platforms during the show. If you ask a question, we'll try to get to it if time permits. But if not, we'll certainly get to it after the program on the feed. So please do ask your questions. That's why we do the show, so that you can learn what you need to learn. Now, please share the show with your network. Give it a like or share so that they can benefit from these conversations as well. And today, I've got somebody that I've been wanting to talk to for a while, who I've been getting to know here recently, and very excited to have on the program today, John Baldoni. John is an internationally recognized leadership consultant, coach, and author of 14 books that have been translated into over 10 languages. He is an Inc. Magazine top 100 speaker. He's a global guru, top 30 leadership expert since 2007, so a long time. And he's a highly sought after executive coach and leadership educator. And today, John and I are going to talk about his latest book, and we're going to talk about the coronavirus and where that is, how we can lead through these tough times. But his latest book is called Grace, and we're going to talk about today how that can make us better leaders. John, welcome.
Thank you, Rhett. It's a pleasure to be on with you. As you know, I'm a longtime fan of yours. So meeting of the minds right now, live on camera.
Thank you. Man, we are in some strange times. And I know you and we've both been just, although I know our businesses are taking a hit, I've never been as busy, really, just talking to people. And everybody's trying to get their head around what's going on, and then what that means for their business, what that means for their people, what that means for their families. I mean, how do you get your head around all this? How do you lead your business in a time like this?
Well, the first thing, we've talked about this before, Brett, emotion, and I did a piece on this for Medium, which is a new outlet for me. But I called Taking Care of the Most Important Person in a Pandemic, You. Now, that's not being selfish. That's being practical. It's like the airlines advise when you're flying, if you're an adult, put the mask on for your first, then apply it to the child. The reason we say take care of yourself first is because if you don't, then you can't be of value to others. So it's kind of first step. So, and that's especially true for a leader. So taking care of yourself means, keep your exercise well, get a routine, get an exercise routine, try to get on a schedule. More importantly, then look outward, connect with your people. And this is really hard for a lot of executives because many of them are extroverts and they crave the other interaction with other people. That's where they get their energy. And suddenly, they're isolated. And so where's my source of energy? Introverts have a little different take because they're comfortable being alone, but still in an organizational setting, we are used to having colleagues around. So we need to interact. And we're doing it virtually now. And that's what I've been spending a lot of time, my time on, working with executives that I've worked with in the past, reaching out, hey, do you want to just chat? What's going on? And that there's a lot of things you can do. Most importantly, it's stay calm. The world is sort of coming apart. But for a leader, this, right? Because you run a couple of companies, you have to keep yourself together. And because if you are showing fear, other people are going to get really afraid. And I always go back to an example. When I was in college, I worked for a newspaper, and they send me out to fires and things. And the first thing I learned about a house fire or a fire, it's really hot. When you're on television, when you're on television, you don't see the heat. But actually, and I would look over, and the calmest person on there is the fire battalion chief, and they'd be kind of standing back and, calm as a day. Those days they'd smoke cigarettes or maybe drink coffee, and they go, something going on here, but actually I don't know what that person was feeling, but they were radiating a sense of calm. Why? So others could do it. And when times get tight, that's when the leaders take it down. The military has this thing. Tensions go up, your voice as commander goes down, because people need to trust you. Now, that doesn't mean you're Pollyanna. You can feel fear. And, the great John McCain used to say, and this is a quote that many have said, including Franklin Roosevelt, is fear is not the absence of courage. It's the management of it. And that's what we need to do. Manage your emotions, because people are counting on you. So, and part of that, being in a pandemic is straight talk. I mean, every employee for a company wants to be told everything is going to be okay. And as a matter of fact, you're going to get a bonus. Well, that's not going to happen, Rhett. And if I did say that to you, you probably wouldn't believe me, but I blow my credibility. I want to be able to say the truth. And I learned a line from someone who had a former executive who had been in the pharmaceutical industry and, been through a lot of change and mergers and acquisitions. And he said, his line was always, I'll tell you what I know when I can. And keep the communication going constantly. I think our governors are doing a great job with that. Andrew Cuomo's on regularly. Even in our White House, we're seeing these daily briefings. So people need to see that. Okay. So they need to see and feel and touch you. Now we have to do it virtually these days, but it's necessary. And so, taking care of yourself and so you can take care of your team.
Yeah. And then over communicate, right? Just tell people the honest truth, the honest assessment. But you have to have a plan. I mean, it's not like you got to have a plan, right?
Right.
But the plan right now is evolving, and I think you can be honest and say, this is what we're trying to do right now.
Right.
Next week, I was telling somebody the other day that we were talking through a problem, and my suggestion was just take it day by day. Plan today, right? And break it down into more honest, because you don't know what next week is looking like, and you can't have an absolute, right? You can't say that with absolute certainty. So, but you can say what you're doing right now, today.
An image came to me, and you probably know it from the book, Jim Collins' Good to Great, which is almost 20 years old now. And in there, Jim spent a lot of time at Stanford. And another person who was at Stanford and the Hoover Institute was Admiral Stockdale. We know Admiral Stockdale was in the Hanoi Hilton for 7 years, along with John McCain. And one day, according to Collins, he got in a conversation with him. And he said, Admiral, who are the guys that didn't come back? And fortunately, most of them did. And Stockwell said, oh, that was easy. He said, well, tell me. He said, it was the guys that would go at Christmas. We'll be home by Christmas. Christmas would come and go. And then he'd go, oh, we'll be home by Easter. Easter would come and go. We'll be home by the 4th of July. And on and on and on. And Stockwell said they died of a broken heart. And so while we can plan and while we have our goals, in times of crisis, don't become overly invested in a specific outcome. Better to think more open-endedly, i.e., we will survive. That type of thing, rather than it'll all be over by May 1st. It'll all be over by May 15th. Because if you make those promises, then when May 1st comes or May 15th, and that a crisis is persisting, people are let down. And there's some psychic damage there.
Yeah. And your credibility damage, right? I mean, even if you do survive, you're going to have limited credibility if you've, because you're never going to hit that date. That's not.
Something else is, if we're already, and this came up in our conversation today, Rhett, and it's we're going through crisis right now, and it's not going to be over in the short term. But what's going on for some people, particularly our healthcare workers on the front line, there's going to be some trauma, call it PTSD or whatever. So, and others may feel that too. So as a leader, be vigilant to the needs of your people. I say that all the time, but as we go forward, because we're all in this together. I like to say together we'll persist. Well, together we will persist. Yeah. And if we persist and we hold tight to one another, we'll make it. We'll survive.
Yes, we will. And that we can say, I think. That we can say.
Yeah.
If we do it together, we'll get through it. It's not going to be painless, but we can get through it. Exactly. We got to talk about the book now. And because I think I love props. Thank you.
Shameless, totally shameless.
You gotta be, man. You gotta be. We gotta. What does grace mean?
Grace is a catalyst for the greater good. We most often associate it, and rightly so, with a faith-based tradition. And I was raised Catholic, and the idea of grace is that it is a gift with no strings attached. So it's an impetus to pay it forward. You didn't earn it, but you pay it forward. Grace is endemic actually in every faith that I researched: Islam, Judaism, Hinduism. It's also predates doesn't predate Judaism because that's 5,000 years, but I was going to say the ancient Greeks. They had this concept of it. And really, if you think about it, it's in our DNA. We are wired to care for our children, our spouse, whatever, our family. And so that's really, and grace becomes kind of the facilitator, that it gives you the ability. In a way, it's a lubricant, if you will, that facilitates that you're enable yourself to stay connected, to give. There's another element to grace, which comes back, and grace is also a sense of centeredness. And we see this in people who are effective leaders, and they give of themselves. And Adam Grant, I'm sure you know, the professor at Wharton, and wrote a book, a few books. Give and Take is where I'm taking this concept from. It's how do successful givers not get burned out? Maybe in a way it echoes what we had just talked about with the Stockwell syndrome. They don't become overinvested. They are good in the outcome. So I'm going to do what I can to help you, Rhett, and I'm going to give of myself. But if you don't make it, well, I'm moving on. I mean, it's not that I'm being callous, but I'm not putting all my eggs in your success. If I did that and your business fails, Rhett, then I'm going to be devastated too. You can't do that. So the grace is that ability to keep moving forward. And as we talked about grace, I've turned into an acronym. So it's G is generosity, R is respect, A is action, C is compassion, and E is energy. So what's all that mean? Successful leaders or people are generous. Okay, from a leadership standpoint, it means you are open to sharing power. That's something Adam Grant talks about too. Is the more, and I think it was Stockwell that also said, the more power you give away, the more it reflects positively on the leader, or the more power the leader gains, because it's not a solo enterprise, it's a joint enterprise, shared vision, if you will. So that's the generosity. But also, then it's respect. And we throw that word around a lot. And in our time of what I like to say, not an original term, but sadly, anti-social media, when we're so quick on the trigger, it's like I see something and I go, and I've been victim of this. I mean, I'm not perfect. I've thrown stones, now what a stupid thing. But how about, and respect is looking at someone and essentially letting them prove themselves, giving them the power. I'm going to assume the best in you, Rhett, so that you can succeed. And then if it doesn't work out, we have a conversation, and we maybe, if it's irreparable, we move on, So, but I'm respecting you as a human being. From an organizational standpoint, I'm more than, you're just not my worker, my employee. You are my contributor, my partner, our partner. Okay, that's a form of respect. I'm going to jump to the C, because that's where we are right now. Especially, it's compassion. It's love of others. Okay, and classic example, of course, is a Mother Teresa. This woman came from disadvantaged background, or I mean, not disadvantaged. Everybody in her village was poor, and then she became a nun and ended up in India and said, "This is my real calling," and started her own order. So this sense of compassion and care and love of others. And sometimes I always like this. This is a good analogy, and I did talk about it in the book. You probably remember the famous football coach, Vince Lombardi. Well, Vince was on the rubber chicken circuit. He was a good speaker. He often talked about love. And you would think, and those in the 60s and some football coach talking about love, and what's that, But it's really, it's care and concern for other people. And that's where compassion comes in, the humanity of others, looking at them as people. And it's so easy to think, you do something wrong and you're off my list, and part of all of this grace gives us the ability to forgive. And when we forgive, we let go of the hatred in us, the animus. And, a couple of moving examples. I remember from Sadly, it was
stress of it all. You're letting go of the stress of it all. I mean, the stress of carrying all that around. You're letting go of all of that.
Yes, right. And we saw a living example that it was a shooting, sadly, nearly 20 years ago in an Amish community, where a grandfather spoke up first, and he had lost 2 granddaughters in the shooting. And he said, "I want the family of the shooter to know that we forgive him, or we don't hold them in animus." We saw the same kind of thing in Charleston, in the shooting in the Grace Emmanuel Church, when people said that, where does that come from? In their worst possible hour. That's grace. They were showing grace. And I think that grace is out there, and we need it. And we need to forgive ourselves, because we're all failed. And we also need to show mercy. I'm right all the time, but you always screwing up, Rhett. Well, what's that going to give me? Again, as you said, that's a negative emotion. If I'm always looking at you and you say, "What a screw up," I mean, that's it's actually not only demotivating for you, it's for me too. How about some mercy? How about I look at you compassionately, generously, respectfully? And that's where grace enters. Now, the A and the E, that's the leadership quotient. And the subtitle of this book is A Leader's Guide for a Better Us, which our friend Alan Mulally, who's in the book, loved that subtitle. And it's because Alan was that team guy. Alan was always talking about the team. Whenever you talk about when he was leading forward, it was never about him. It was always, well, our team did this, our team did that. We're boom, boom, building this together. And they've been through crisis to Alan was at 9/11. He was at Boeing at 9/11. And then with the financial crisis, the Great Recession in 2008. So he was always the team. So he puts people forward, puts the team forward. And the energize, as what Rhett, as a small business person, a successful business person, you got to be the source of energy. And maybe now that we're working virtually, our teams, it's harder, I think. I mean, you would say that too, but we got to show energy for other people and for my team. And how do I do that? How do I do that virtually?
Yeah. What is one of the things I loved about the book was what were the stories, and Alan's story obviously is in it, and several others. What can you pull out one or two of those?
Yeah, I can give you a big story and a little story. Okay. One is I'm in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and which is near Flint, Michigan. And I'm sure everybody tuning in knows about the Flint water crisis. Well, that came to the fore through the action of a very dedicated pediatrician. Her name is Dr. Mona Hannah Atisha. And she was working in a clinic in Flint, and she noticed her kids, the children were coming in and they had lead levels. And like, what's that? We're in the 21st century, lead level. Curiously, she happened to be with a friend from CDC who said, I've seen this before. You have a epidemic, and this is lead poisoning. So she, Hannah's a practitioner. She's an academic medicine. She's at Michigan State, taking care of her patients, and she contacted authorities or whatever, and nobody's doing anything. So she just became the champion. She acted for the benefit of her own. She got out of her own comfort zone to take care of her patients. And she's a wonderful example of mobilizing in a time of need, acting. I'll give you a real simple story, and it's again from Michigan. But one of our woeful sports teams is the Detroit Lions, who've not won one playoff game in 62 years. They had a longtime color man who's also used to play football at Michigan, the University of Michigan, and he also announces at Michigan games. But he'd been on with this team as color announcer for 31 years. So in July of, 2016 or 2017, 18, whatever, he calls up the studio or station. He said, hey, I haven't heard from you. I just wanted to get organized for the next season. Guy on the phone tells him, he said, well, Jim, you're not coming back. And he goes, what? And he goes, well, we've made a change. Boom, hangs up. So Jim is in the media, okay? So then he calls them back like 5 minutes later, and he says, sorry if I sounded short on the phone to you, but your your news caught me off guard. So just want to know, there's no hard feelings here. Here's a man who's frankly been wronged, or certainly not treated equitably after 31 years of service, told to hit the road, Jack, and he's apologizing to them because that's the force of his kind of kindness. That's mercy. Where does that come from? That's grace. That's a little example. It's a big thing for him, but it's a small example. And why I choose that, we have Mona, who's this huge story, okay, international, and then Jim's little personal episode. And so what I'm trying to say is that grace can mobilize us to do great things, but also simple things. And I like the story of Jim Brandstetter, is the name of the gentleman, because so often, maybe you're my boss and I do something and you kind of blow me off or, whatever, and I take it to heart, or you don't even care. And I said, well, that Rhett's an idiot, or whatever it is. And I just, the tension mounts. Let it go, especially from a leadership position. Let it go. And one of my favorite stories is George Washington. And Washington was a great leader. He was not a great military strategist. And so for much of the early part of the revolution, people were actually actively undermining him. And one of whom was his own aide-de-camp, a young man last name is Reed. And Washington happened to cross some correspondence that Reed had with a general. I don't know which one it was. And Washington read the correspondence inadvertently, but sealed it back up, gave it to Reed, and he said, I think you might want to keep this. And so all of a sudden, Reed knows he's caught, but Washington just, look, I don't have time for this. We're fighting for our existence. That's what good leaders do. If it was a more serious example, you don't blow it off. But look, don't take it personally on these kinds of things. That's where grace comes in. And I'm not, I'm somebody who can get angry with customer service people. So I'm trying to get better, but we need to let go, especially now, Brett, in our crisis time. It's not worth it. Anyway.
No, it isn't. It really isn't. You're absolutely right. And I love the small examples because that happens every day, right? you're not going to find Flint but I mean, not many people are going to have their Flint, right?
Thank goodness.
Right. Thank goodness. But every day you're going to have somebody that isn't nice, uh, doesn't do the right thing, doesn't say the right thing, doesn't act the right way. And that we all experience that every day of our lives. And so that's important that we practice it at that level, so that if something big comes along, we we're in that mindset. But you're absolutely right.
Right.
One of the things that I want to continue this sort of line of questions, is grace something that we can learn, or can we change? Because I remember I wish I'd have known this stuff when I was 20, right?
It wouldn't have mattered. I mean, I'm not speaking for you, speaking for me.
No, you can speak for me in this case. You're absolutely right. But I remember this boss. You remember Dilbert, the cartoon? I'm sure you do.
Yeah, love it. Love it.
I had a boss like that. And I wonder if people can change. Like, is it possible?
Yes, but let's back up a bit. What
Okay.
we don't change personality. And that's what our norm reference assessments, MBTI or CPI or Hogan or all the great instruments show us. Unless there's some kind of brain trauma, and I'm not being facetious about that, but generally you don't. Maybe a little bit with age, it change. But for purposes of executive coaching, you don't change. You don't change personality. What you do change is behavior. And that's where, so for example, if you are a hard driving boss, you're wired to be that way. You're aggressive, and I'm not saying that in a negative stance, because that's part of your attribute.
Right.
What you can learn to lead, or you should, is you got to ease off, and Marshall wrote this great book, What Got You Here Won't Get You There. Yeah, right. And it's the skills of and very often it's the skills of an individual contributor that gets you promoted, but they don't prepare you for management or leadership. So absolutely you can change, but it takes effort. It takes commitment. And maybe that's where grace comes in. It facilitates it. Why? Because grace is other directed. And you know well that I'd like to say leadership's not about me, but it's all about me. So what do I mean? It's my job to provide you with a direction, pointed in the right direction, support, and all of those things. So it's not about me. On the other hand, if I don't do that, who does? So I'm the one that's got to coach, counsel, make the hard decisions, all of that. That's a leader's role. So grace can facilitate that. Why? Because grace is other directed, and it reminds us, certainly from a leadership standpoint, that we achieve very little by ourselves. We can achieve much through others.
What are we sort of hit on it before, but let's say you're listening to this and you say, okay, this makes a lot of sense to me, and I'm looking for a way to be a more graceful leader, to lead through grace. Are there a few tips or steps you think you could do to practice this? I mean,
yeah.
Yeah, go ahead. Because
it's basically, it's going back to act with generosity, be more open, treat people with respect, the dignity of them as human beings, the dignity of the job they do. Also be compassionate. Look, when you're slighted, don't take it, just move on, act with patience, which is tough for me, and it's tough for a lot of leaders. Because why? Because leaders are activists. They want to make things happen. And patience, so often, I haven't do this little exercise. I ask a leader, I said, tell me about patience. And I go, I'm really lousy at it, and I'll go, well, why? And they go, I said, what about patience? Who's in control? And kind of a light bulb goes off, and they go, oh yeah, because we don't control events, Rhett, obviously, we control how we react to them. So patience, learn to act with patience. And this is good for type A leaders. Exert with control. Start to live more mindfully. Okay, I know that's a buzzword, but it's powerful. Okay, what is mindfulness? It's a sense of living in the present, appreciating it. And I like to say, because I wrote about it in my book, Moxie, it's for a leader, there's a kick up to it. It's that presence, it's living in the moment and being there for your people. And when you and I are having a conversation, Brett, I'm not looking at my smartphone. I'm not making phone calls. I'm not doing this. I'm focused on you. I'm listening. I'm actively, I ask you questions. We have a conversation. That's being in the moment. For mindfulness and for a leader, it's a kick up because it gets to the term that you would know well, situation awareness. What's happening around us? What's going on around us? Because especially now, in the time of Corona, I am present for my people. If it's virtual, that's fine, because people are used to virtual anyway, because we work globally. So it's not the end of the world. It's not the totally different. But what else is going on? I know my people are going through trauma or big change. My company everything's in flux. That's my situation. So it can't all be happy talk and it can't be all gloom talk. We've got to find that balance. So that's where that's acting with grace, And I think really the bottom line is learning to act for others, which is, it's you can put it on a poster and put a photograph in it and but it really means something. Act for others. That's grace.
Yeah, I mean, it comes down to really keeping yourself in check, right? I mean, your response, being more mindful and more self-aware of how your facial expressions, I remember I used to roll my eyes at that boss I was talking about, right? And at some point it became just involuntary. I didn't even know I was doing it.
Not a good sign if that person isn't your boss.
And so, but it does. It means becoming more self-aware about how you act and how you respond and more conscious of that. Yeah. Let's you said something in the book that I want to quote, and I want to dig into why what inspired it. You said purpose emerges from the why of what we do. Mm-hmm. Grace enables the how of what we do. Right. And I loved that quote, or whatever you call it, that part. Where'd that come from, and where? I mean, because you've written a lot on leadership. You've written a lot on.
Right. Thank you. I wish I had put that quote, and I'll say it. I wish I'd had that in Grace, but I wasn't smart enough when I read it. When I wrote it, it came afterwards when I did my virtual book tour. But I can still build upon it because it builds upon the ideas that I've talked about. But I've written about purpose in a couple of different books. But purpose is our why, and that's something Simon Sinek and many others have said. So if we think about our why, personally or organizationally, it sparks our vision, okay? Our sense of becoming. It sparks our mission, which is our building and our doing, all right? My purpose. From my own sense, when I'm asked about what purpose is, I say, what gets you up in the morning? That's really what do you want to do? That's your purpose, and how you align it with your goals and objectives. Now, as you and I know, maybe your Dilbert style boss was the classic example of knowing the vision, knowing the mission, although he wasn't all that bright, whatever. But so he tried to manage in spite of people. Now, here's where grace comes in. Purpose is our why. Grace is our how. And from grace comes our values, which stimulates our belonging. So you can work in spite of people, but how much better is it when we work together? When we pull together. And that's where grace comes in, because it facilitates generosity, compassion, respect, and for one another.
How do you And when you're leading with grace, because I think some would say, well, then that makes me soft, right? How do I demand? How am I demanding? How do I set high expectations? How do I, even today, I mean, I think that's even more relevant today. How in the world do you look at productivity? How do you get somebody on a Skype call or a Zoom call today and say, guys, we got to hit these KPR, we got to hit these, how do you do that with grace?
Well, today might not be the right time to be kicking on a KPR, but because it's not in the control of the sales folks or whoever it is, because they don't have anybody to sell to or whatever. So I don't know what the thing is, but getting back to it on a more general thing is leadership. The soft side of leadership, there's nothing really soft about it, because good leaders can be tough. We use the example of Vince Lombardi speaking about love. Well, he was a tough SOB, So, and also, I've known a lot of leaders who are, warm and cuddly and stuff, but they had the velvet glove. And so when they needed to come down with a hammer, they did, because leaders have to make tough decisions. And it shows up a lot in self-assessment things, your empathy quotient. And sometimes when people rate high on empathy, I said, that makes you a really good human being, but it's tough to manage because you care too much. You got to throttle it back. It's not that you're being unkind. It's that if you are a sub performer, I will provide you with coaching and training, but if I realize you don't have the skills to do this, then we have to come to a parting of the ways. Why? Because if I kept you on, A, you're holding the team back. B, I'm invested. You're a time suck for others because you just don't have the skills to do it. And this happens, mismatch of talent and skills is endemic in every workplace. Yeah. And people keep them around because they're good. Okay, now, if you can get away with it, I mean, if you're a manager, if there's some other reason for this person to be there, fine. But a leader always must act for the good of the whole. And frankly, that's a question the world is facing right now. If we think about Corona, we look at our economic pain, and we look at healthcare and how many people can we save, and the challenge of balancing resources and all of this, and economic balance. That's tough. It's tough stuff. And ideally, we'll lead with grace because we'll do the best we can for the greatest number of people. But we know that some people we cannot save. And this is, we get into triage situations. These raises questions of medical ethics. And there are no easy answers to that. And and I'm not trying to be, flippant about it, but it's a tough stuff. But leaders have to make that tough choice.
Yeah. And I think if you're leading with your values, even in times like this, I think that keeps you on track, right? That keeps you focused. Because if you're leading that way, then this is a challenge, but it helps you make decisions and good decisions, right?
I had worked with a CEO once who always said, when in doubt, fall back on your values. And if your values are aligned, you'll be okay, and you'll make the right decision. And this is probably a good example for if your organization has a strong value proposition, trust the values, and you'll keep it straight, and it won't be perfect. You will make mistakes. But and speaking of that, there's a wonderful essay by our friend Harry Kramer, who ran CEO of Baxter, right, and now teaches at Northwestern. And he was interviewed by a Northwestern Business School, which is my wife's alma mater too. So shout out to the Purple Gang. Anyway, but Harry has a saying about knowing what you can do and know that you'll make the best decision. By extension, you won't always make the right decision. Time will tell. But if you do it with the best intention, that's all you can do. That's all you can do.
Yeah.
And so trust yourself. There's a great scene in a movie called 13 Days in October. It's a story about the Cuban Missile Crisis. It's a dramatization. And in there, there's Kevin Costner plays, which is gentleman, Kenny O'Donnell, who was essentially Kennedy's chief of staff. And he was a friend of Bobby, and was a quarterback on a Harvard football team. And Jack was older than Bobby and consequently Kenny. And then they were debating as to what to do about the Cuban Missile Crisis. Do I make it public and all this kind of stuff? And, and then, he's trying to bucket, the character's trying to buck up the president. And he says, this is not the time to be the Harvard football player, Kenny. And he goes, no. And he said, and he's pondering this scene, and he goes, he said, I know one thing, Mr. President. He said, you'll make the right decision with what you know now. And that's all you can ask, And history judged Kennedy right in the Cuban Missile Crisis. And I think that's the best you can do. You can't second guess once you can equivocate. Not equivocate. You can deliberate. You can get the best minds, but ultimately you got to pull the trigger, And I think we see this with governors like my own Governor Whitmer Governor Whitmer in Michigan, Governor Pritzker in Illinois, Governor Newsom in California, and Governor Cuomo in New York. We are seeing these men and women step up and make the tough decisions. Everything they're doing isn't right, but I think it's right at the time. So that's what you have to trust.
It's based on imperfect information. It's
absolutely. Yeah. Right. And that's, and maybe that's where grace comes in, because it gives you that inner strength of, I'm going to forgive myself, not because that doesn't give me license to act like a jerk or blow off data or anything like that, but I got to give it my best call with what I know.
And it's in my hands to make that call. It's my responsibility to make that call.
Yeah.
And owning that as your responsibility, I think gives you so much credibility in the tank. We were talking about that the other day on our morning call that we're both on. And I think it was, I don't remember who said it, but they said, you've got to have credibility in the gas tank, right? To lead through this. And I think that's taking and owning that responsibility, I think, is what people want somebody to do, right?
I'm glad you brought that up, Rhett, because there has to be a silver lining in what we're going through. And I think crisis either breaks a leader or it makes him or her. And I would like to think a lot of leaders are earning a lot of street cred right now. And employees will remember who stepped up and who did what. And little things probably become more important now than ever before. So if you're in a leadership position, don't forget the little stuff. The personal contact and staying in touch and making those decisions and keeping people informed and all of that stuff. But at the same time, this is an opportunity to show what you're made for. There's a great scene. This is actually in Winston Churchill, one of the many leaders that one of my heroes. He was a flawed human being, certainly, but on the day he was named prime minister, which really nobody in cabinet really liked Winston, because they didn't quite trust him for his party affiliation, not as a human being. But it was, and he said, he said to his diary, I was born for this. And it was his greatest hour. So whatever.
Yeah. So no, he's the one that got the country country up and put his arm around them collectively and led. And I was thinking about, we were just talking about that, and I was reading something yesterday in one of the publications, and it was about this pizza shop in New Jersey, and the guy's taking out a $50,000 personal loan to pay his employees through this. Wow.
Yeah.
That shows that. That's the kind of leadership that you want, right? That's the kind of person that you will go to the ends of the earth to work for.
Absolutely. And that's a humanity. That's, he's doing that because he's looking at his employees as human beings. He's treating them with compassion.
Yeah.
And that's,
I find it remarkable.
Pretty powerful. So,
pretty powerful is correct. You were going to do something special for us, man.
Yes, at the risk of turning my back on the audience, I play piano, and I regularly play as a volunteer in area hospitals. I can no longer do that for health reasons, and so I wanted to play, which I think is the world's greatest motivational song of all time, "Over the Rainbow." So I'm going to do a little improvised version of that with your indulgence. So excuse me for turning my back, but I'll just give it a whirl here. So
okay.
There we go.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. That was wonderful. Can you do an encore?
You want me to do something else? You know what? I'll do what. We need a little uplift. All right.
All right. Do it.
When we're talking uplift, what do you got? Irving Berlin. Okay.
All right.
No business like show business. Hats off to Irving.
Well, thank you so much. And thank you for spending some time with us today here on the Power Lunch. And in this special time, we know that everybody's struggling. We know everybody's impacted by this. Take care, as John was talking about, take care of yourself, take care of your loved ones, enjoy this time, this downtime in some respects to focus on what's important and what's meaningful to you. And thank you for your time today. We'll be back tomorrow. Got another great program. And if you want to find out the upcoming schedule, it's on powerlunch.live, powerlunch.live. It's a website. We've got past episodes on there. We've got the podcast, which these get turned into. And if you want to listen to some past episodes, we've got a great bunch for you to listen to. So thank you so much. Have a great day. Go out and continue to do good work and take care of yourself. Thanks, John.
Thank you.